Alright, in this tutorial we're going to take a look at how to render out your model as part of a turntable. And we're going to do that in two ways, one with a wireframe and one with a textured turntable. So the file that I'm providing you with includes this bowl. Basically this is a big bowl that will, once you're sort of zoomed up on your object here, function as a way to block us from seeing the outside, basically the empty space. There's also a light in this scene, and currently in my scene I have a pear model, which is what I'm going to be using. The version that I give you, of course, is not going to have this pear, but this is just for my own purposes. You can bring your own model in here. You'll probably need to scale your model to fit so that it sits properly within this space. And I just want to quickly talk about the two lighting components that I have in here. The first thing is that around my entire scene, you'll see there's this big sphere, and this is a big light dome basically, which is part of the Arnold rendering options. So in my Arnold renderer, if I come down into the environment section, you'll see that I have this background enabled. And that is, if I were to go in here and create a sky shader, that's the same thing that I get there. It's just the default options within the sky shader. And I've turned its overall intensity down to, I believe, 0.2. So it's just giving a little bit of ambient light, basically, all around my model so that it doesn't end up getting dark. And the other thing that I have in here is this spotlight. Now, this spotlight is just one sort of a key source of light in this scene. And if I hit the 7 key here, you'll see that it's just going off and has this very soft fall off. My options for this light have a high intensity because it has a quadratic decay. And so this is similar to what you would expect from an Arnold light, although this is not an Arnold light. This is just one of Maya's default lights that you find by going to Create Lights Spotlight. It has a big cone angle, so you can change that depending on what you need for your scene to make that either a bigger or narrower light, but probably around 80 is good. It's got that soft fall off because it's got a high penumbra angle and it's got a high drop off as well. Just also worth mentioning that under the Arnold section here that the decay type is also set to quadratic. It's got shadows that are on with a shadow radius of 2 samples, and that should probably be enough for most scenes. It creates a sort of a nice soft shadow. Okay, with that being said, let's just take a look at what we get when we try to render this object. Now you'll see that if I hit the 6 key, I have a texture on this object, and it's my pear texture that I already have in this scene. If I go to my hypershade, so that loads up there, I have a couple things. First off, in fact, what I'm going to do is instead of letting this pear shader be on there right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'll create a new material that I can apply to this, which will just be a blend material. So let's go in and create a new material. And I'm going to click on my object here. Oops. Let's get that working there. Click on my object, and I'll say assign favorite material, and we'll assign here a blend. Adds in a new blend. And in my options here, I'm just going to make a couple changes. I can leave the color as it is. I'm going to just push up the diffuse. I'm going to reduce the reflectivity, move up the eccentricity, and probably just push up the roll-off a little bit as well. So maybe just pull down that specular color a bit, something like that. That's probably good. All right, so let's just see really quickly what we get when we do that. I'm going to apply that to the stem as well. And this way we don't have to worry about looking at the overall texture color yet. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to enable my render dimensions there. And let's go ahead and make sure we're in the Arnold renderer, and we will render from our persp view. So render persp. Let's see what we get here. Okay, cool. So this is overall the effect that I'm getting. Um, Now, one of the things to notice is that this big bowl that I have things in has a color on it, and that color is designed there specifically to give you something that sits in the background that makes it look a little bit interesting, as opposed to just being blank and boring. What I'm going to do is go into the Arnold render view here, and let's just turn that on so we can get a real-time feedback there. And this way now, if you wanted to go in and make some changes, let's say to your, if we wanted to go in and take a look at that spotlight, for example, we could go in and make some changes and affect where that spotlight is hitting our pear, for instance. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to create a new perspective view here so that I don't mess up my original perspective view. Now I'm going to click on this spotlight, and while you can obviously move it around with the normal move and rotation tools and all that, it's actually a lot easier if you treat this light as if it were a camera. And we can do that by having it selected and going to Panels, Look Through Selected. And now what we get here is it treats this overall image, this overall light, as if it were a camera, which means that I can move it around now. And you'll see that as I move this around, it's updating here in the Arnold render view. So I can get a better sense of, where exactly do I want the highlight to hit that pear. If I wanted to make any changes to the overall, cone angle here, for example, of the light, if I change that around, you can see that we get the real-time feedback there as well. Or if I wanted to change the penumbra, if I brought that way down, for instance, down to like 0, what effect does that have? And I'm just going to keep that up at 10. I'm pretty much going to leave it where it was, but I'm just pointing out to you that this is one way that you can start playing around. And even if you decided that you wanted a different color, so long as it wasn't anything too outrageous, then you could do that as well. But I'm just going to put it back to white. So yeah, and it's a good way to be able to play around with your textures as well. So for instance, if I decided that this blend needed to be slightly adjusted, I don't want it to be too shiny, but maybe something more like this right here feels a little bit more natural. And yeah, I can live with that. Okay, so once I feel pretty happy with that, then I can go back to my persp view here. There we go. And so the next thing that I want to be able to do is to set this up so that I can use this as a turntable. So that basically what a turntable does is it creates a camera that just goes from your currently selected position in basically your current camera angle, camera view. So I just want to make sure that this is right in the center as much as possible, and that I have the correct dimensions for my camera. So this should actually be 1280 by 720. It will take whatever that current position is and then create a camera that goes around at 360 degrees, which is basically what a turntable is. So it's easiest to show you this if I have my object selected right here. I'm going to go to Animation, Visualize, and I'm going to create a turntable. Now I'm going to go in here and choose my options. So its default number of frames is 24. And if we think 24 frames per second, that's going to be just that's basically going to be 1 second to go all the way around my pear, which is going to be pretty darn fast. My experience, the best turntables are about 8 seconds long. So if we take 8 times 24, we get 8 times 24, which is 192 frames. All right, so let's set this to 192. And we'll say create turntable. All right. Now I already had my scene here open to 192 frames, so that was convenient. I'm going to start us at 1. And now you'll see that as I scrub my timeline here, I end up with a nice long turntable, which is going to be 8 seconds in length. Now, and it's continuous, as you can see. Now, if I watch this though, like if I've been rendering this from this view here, make sure we get the same render that we had before. It's taking a little bit longer because it's a little bit bigger. And it's rendering from the turntable camera shape, which is exactly where we want it to render from. If it wasn't, you could always go to render, render, and choose which camera you want to render from. But now, if I were to go and let's say go to the opposite side, halfway around, and compare these, what do we get? Now it's dark on the back side, as you can see. And that's because although the camera's going around, the light is staying in the same place. So we're seeing the unlit side of the pair here. So ultimately, if we want this to function like a real turntable, we need the light to rotate around with it. And so if I just go back into my perspective view here and move out, we don't necessarily see that turntable. Actually, maybe we do. No, I don't see that turntable camera going around. It's kind of hidden. But what I can do is come into my outliner. If I find it here, it's neither of those windows. It's over here. All right, so if we go through here and we try to find where is that turntable, it's actually under this group 3 right here, which I could call my turntable GRP for group, right? If I were to take my spotlight and move it down here into my turntable group, which I can just click on the spotlight, middle mouse click on it, and drag it to where it says turntable group, right? Now, as I rotate or as I move my playhead here, you'll see that the spotlight goes around. It's inheriting the motion of the turntable group. Now, it's important that you put the spotlight under turntable GRP and not under turntable camera, because otherwise it'll become hidden. This, where it's grayed out here, indicates that it's hidden. If I can unhide it by hitting Shift H, and you'll start to see it here, and you can see that that's the two are going around there like that. That's interesting. Yep, okay, just wanted to make sure that they were following each other at the same rate, and they are. They're just a little bit offset from each other, which is fine. Okay, so I'll just hit Control H to hide that again. Now, if we were to go here and go back to that same frame that we were at before, which was frame 92 or so, frame 92, and re-render, we should see that this is giving us the right, it's basically, it's giving us a view here that is perfectly lit, which is good. Okay, cool. So we have that set up now. Now the next thing that we need to do is, instead of just rendering it out as this, where it's nice and smooth shaded and all that, I want to be able to see in your work the wireframe, right? So in order to do that, we need to go in, and I'm going to select both the in this case, the stem and the object, and basically this is an opportunity here for me to, I'm just going to hit the 1 key on the keyboard to set it back to its the unsmooth preview, just the basic shape of the object. Hitting 3, of course, makes it a smooth preview. Hitting 1 makes it an unsmooth preview. The reason I do this is because when I create the wireframe outline, it's going to be based on the lower resolution version. So what I'm going to do here is go in and select my object, and I am going to go and now apply an interesting little trick. So to make a wireframe, there are various ways, but I'm going to use an option that works for rendering in Arnold. And in order to do that, I need to go to the rendering menu set, have my object selected. In this case, I'm just currently selecting the base of the pair body, basically. For this example, I'm not going to go ahead and worry about the stem just because it's got too much geometry there for me to worry about. And so I select my pair, and I'm going to go ahead and now go to rendering, tune, and I'm going to assign a tune outline. Assign new tune outline. And this is using the Maya's Toon shader, which is quite cool. But there's some settings you really got to follow here. So the first thing is where it says profile lines, turn that off. Where it says border lines, turn that off. Make sure that crease lines is on. Okay, so now we're going to come down here to where it says crease lines and open that up. We're going to take our crease angle min and crease angle max, and we're going to put both of those down to 0. So now you can see we're starting to get basically a whole bunch of lines wherever there are wherever there's the polygons on, basically the edges. So what I need to do though is reduce the line width here because it's too fat for my object. And this is really going to come down to the size of your object, whatever you decide to use. So I'm going to use something around the value of 0.25 because I think that that's going to look okay. Now, the reason why I avoided doing on this is because the geometry is too dense, but actually the example I show you later is where I've simplified this object and used just a tinier line width, like 0.15. So you will see lines in the example that I show you in a bit. Now, this is all well and good, but if I were to try to go and render this now, what I would get is this. Nothing, right? And I just noticed that for some reason my light appears to, is it not following my, yeah, interesting. What just got rendered there? Oh, that was rendering from the persp shape. Okay, never mind. Just go back and render from, back to 92 here, and render from Turntable Camera 1. That's why it's always important to read down here what the camera is that you're rendering from, because it can mess you up, just like that. Right, so what you need to take from this is that even though I have that cool toon outline on my pair, it doesn't show up here in Arnold. And that's because the toon shader is something that is not available for anything outside of the Maya software renderer. But that's if you leave it in its native state. So what I'm going to do is click on the toon shader, and just to make sure that you have it, you can always go in and find it in your outliner. It's the thing that says PFX Toon, and go to Modify, Convert, and what this thing is called a Paint Effects object. Now the Paint Effects tools are a large, cool set of tools that exist in Maya. Just the toon shaders happen to be one aspect of all the different paint effects available, but they are not renderable outside of the Maya software renderer. So what we need to do is actually convert paint effects to polygons, and if we make it a polygonal object, then it will be able to be rendered. We don't need to worry about the options necessarily. We're just going to say paint effects to polygons, and bam. Now it doesn't really look like anything's changed there, but now this is actually a series of polygons. So if I come back here now and render again, render Turntable Camera, right, now we can see that, which is quite useful. Okay, so that's pretty much all we need to really worry about there. The only other thing is that this is taking too long to render, in my opinion. And I did a little bit of experimentation here earlier, and I discovered that if I just turn down, in this example, my camera anti-aliasing, and I can get rid of my refraction, SSS, and volume indirect, that the overall result will still be good. So if I just take that now, it's taking 12 seconds there. If I render it now, let's just see how long it takes. 6 seconds. All right, so that's a lot better. Okay, so with that, now we need to render out our turntable. So I'm going to come to my Common tab, and I'm going to say, let's go ahead and give this a name. We'll call it something like pair underscore turntable underscore wireframe. All right. My image format will stay at, well, if I leave it at EXR, I am not going to be able to open up the EXR files in Premiere because Premiere doesn't read EXR files. I can open them up in After Effects, obviously, And if you wanted to do any color correction in After Effects, that's fine. It's just that you would have to export it out as something different before you could bring it into Premiere. So that you could export it out as a QuickTime sequence using like the H.264 or animation codecs, or you could export it out as a series of like TIFF images that are not compressed or something like that. Either way, up to you. If you just want to directly export this to something like Premiere, then you can export it out from here as like TIFF images, and that's up to you. So yeah, I just like EXR as a format overall, using no compression. Name underscore number dot extension, frame padding of 3, start and end 1 to 192. My renderable camera should just be this one here. I don't want the PERSP camera. And HD 720, and all good, right? These settings here, all good. So now what I can do is I can send this off and say render sequence, and it will render out all of this, which is great. But there's one other thing that still needs to be rendered. So just presume, pause the video here, render that all out. Shouldn't take too long if you use these render settings, but make sure to come back, because the next thing that we need to do is to render it out with the textures applied and without this wireframe. So let's go ahead and get rid of the wireframe. So go in here to the outliner, grab PFX Tune, and delete it. Now that doesn't seem to have gotten rid of everything. PFX Tune plus this thing that says Mesh Group. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my my mesh, and I'm going to go back to my Hypershade. I'm going to apply to it the shaders that I originally had on there. So I had that one on the base and this one on the stem. Right, hit the 6 key and I can see them again. Hit the 7 key and I can see the overall lighting in the scene. And I can now, if I want to, I can hit the 3 key, because this will do a smooth mesh preview. And I don't have to worry about those wireframes anymore. So it's kind of nice to have it smooth. You'll just want to check to make sure that in your model, if you have a really low resolution model and the low resolution version looks really different from the high resolution version, then you might not want to change it to a smooth mesh preview for the textured version. Because mine are pretty close, I can get away with it. But if you do it, once you see what happens when we combine these together, you'll see where there might be a little bit of a misalignment when we finish it off in the editing stage. Okay, so I guess I'll have to just wait to show you that. So the next thing I want to do is, or I should point out, is as soon as you render out all of those images for the wireframe, go and find them and make sure to put them in their own folder. Because as you continue to render things out, you might start to overwrite some of those images, because by default, where these get written out is in a directory that Maya is basically a temp directory. And whenever you click the render button, if it has the same name, like pair turntable wireframe, and you're on frame 92, then it might overwrite that same frame 92 that you've already rendered out from your going to render sequence. So that's just, go and grab everything that you've already rendered, put it in its own folder so it can't be affected that way. And it's also important that before you begin changing the, doing new renders here, that we change this to something like pair turntable textured. That way the naming is going to be different anyway. So this is just going to be another turntable. This is really simple. We don't really have to do anything different from this. It's just make sure that we see this here. You could do a couple preview renders. So if I just go ahead and do a preview render on this, just to make sure that things look okay. It's always best to test. Right. Now you notice that there is a little bit of noise in here, but I'm not really worried about it for this. We're getting a good overall image. I'm happy with that. And yeah, so I'll go ahead and now render this out as a sequence, right? Because the settings otherwise are going to stay the same. Don't want to change anything. And once I do that, like I said, if you rendered it out as an EXR sequence, you're going to need to bring it into After Effects. If you have rendered it as something else, you can probably bring it just directly into Premiere. So since I rendered mine out as an EXR sequence, I'm just going to quickly bring it in here and grab it off of where I put it. So that was my pair project, images, textured, and import OpenEXR sequence. And I'll also import the wireframe versions. Both of these need to be interpreted at 24 frames per second. Cool. And I can drag them down in here. In fact, actually, I'll drag them down, making sure that I have a 32-bit result. There we go. Cool. So you see that that's working there. And the wireframe underneath. Looks good. Okay. So like I said, if I wanted to, I could do any color correction in here. In fact, maybe I could do just a little bit of exposure adjustment. So effect, color correction, exposure, play around with this a little bit, pull that down, pull this up. Something that looks a little bit more interesting. Compare before and after, right? And I need to apply the exact same adjustment to what sits below. So copy that exposure adjustment there, click on it, copy it, paste it here. Right? That way the backgrounds, for instance, stay looking the same. Okay. That's good. So I'm going to export this out now. So composition, add to render queue. I'm adding the textured version first. So we'll go here and we'll say lossless, change that to QuickTime. H.264 100% quality is all good. And we're going to export this out into the pair there. We'll call this, put this into a folder called clips. And this is pair turntable textured, that's right. Render. I'll pause the video here. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for this one. Turn off textured version and turn on the wireframe version. So composition, add to render queue, same settings. QuickTime. And call this one pair turntable wireframe. There we go. And render. Okay, so that's all done now. Now what I'm going to do is just pop over here into Premiere. I just want to make a real quick note that I never recommend that you do any of your editing in After Effects. It's just really not the right software to do editing in. And I always recommend that you do it in Premiere if you have Premiere available. Okay, so I just created a new project here inside Premiere, and I'm going to go into import my footage. So I'll just double click here and go and find those two clips that I made. Select both of them and import. All right, and I'm just going to drag one of them. I'll drag the wireframe one down onto the timeline, and that will create a timeline based on the size and the frame rate. Now, if I look in here, if I just play this back, it's playing fine, which is good, looks nice. All right, and now I want to go ahead and also have my my textured version, and I'm going to stick that on top here, and I'll show you why in a moment. But let's just watch that as well. So that's looking good too. Happy with both of those. Now, ultimately, I need there to be a transition where we sort of fade from one across to the other. And so I'm going to copy both of these, paste, and we'll delete there. So basically, they're just continuing rotating here. And I'm going to do that one more time. All right, so basically, shortly after we start rotating for the second time here, I want to come in and start to do a transition. So I'm going to take my, actually I don't really want my textured version on top. I want my wireframe version on top. Let's just turn that around. I had that backwards. So I'll put the wireframe up there. Grab my textured version. Put that down there. There. And there, this will be better. All right, so wireframe on top. I probably don't need this third wireframe actually, because that's good. By the time it gets there, it's going to already be turned off. So I'm going to come down here and reduce the length of my wireframe. I'm going to come into my video transitions under the effects panel. And I'm going to grab a dissolve, and let's do a cross dissolve, and I'm going to place it right here. And I'll extend it a little bit longer than normal. And let's just see what we get when this happens. I'm going to press spacebar and start to see this nice little cross dissolve that occurs right there. And it's because I want to be able to see more of the pair all the way around. I'll probably let it play to about there. Maybe right about there looks pretty good. And then I'll stop the video there. Okay. That way I can see all of the wireframe, and I can see all of the pair texture all the way around. And it ends up being just over 18 seconds, almost 19 seconds long, which is pretty good. And that right there would be the way that I would present the wireframe, well, basically the modeling, which is the wireframe, and the texturing for your object. And then that basically is just going to get added on to the end of your animation. So let's go ahead here and export this. So we'll say, click on our timeline, File, Export, Media. And we want to keep this at as high of a resolution as possible. So I'll click on Match Source here to make sure that the export settings match my timeline settings. That's going to be a QuickTime file. H.264 codec is okay. Put the quality up to 100 because I don't really want there to be any compression. And I can export this out now. And I'll just say export. And of course, actually, what I should have done, which I didn't do there, is indicate where I'm saving it to and the name of it. So it has been exported out here. If I just find it real quick, it's on the E drive. I got exported here. So this is the result. And now you could just take this file and stick it at the end of the rest of your animation. And there you go. It's a great way to be able to show off what you've created. So I hope that was fairly straightforward, and wish you, again, best of luck.